I'm Stacy Rocklein, and I am a relationship coach and a content creator on YouTube and a new author. I just published a book. I am on a mission to eradicate loneliness, which I know sounds like a huge mission, but I think that we do that just each conversation at a time and each relationship at a time. I think of loneliness as us not feeling seen. So you can have relationships all around you and still feel really lonely if you don't feel known by the other people, if you don't feel understood, if you don't feel seen and heard. Something really important too that I think is kind of like a bumper sticker for relationships is that if things get really hard, even if you feel like grit and pushing is the right thing, it's always softening. It's always compassion that is the right thing. So our knee-jerk reaction to maybe just like push through is not going to keep us connected. So that softening and that compassion is always the answer. It will always get you through something better, healthier, with more growth than just grinding your way through.
Stories and Stanza is a podcast exploring creativity, resilience, and the transformative power of human stories. Through our two series, Between the Lines with creators and Fail With Me focusing on wellness and life's challenges, we bring you authentic conversations with inspiring voices from around the world. If you are drawn to meaningful dialogue that both comforts and challenges, follow us on YouTube or any podcast platform. Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Stories and Stanza. Today I am joined by Stacy Rocklein. Hi Stacy, welcome to Stories and Stanza.
I
How are you doing
thank you for
today?
having me.
It's a very gloomy and rainy morning here in Melbourne, and I read that it has started snowing in some of the neighborhood hills here. Usually, this time of the year, it doesn't snow this quickly. It's usually later in the winter. So we are going into our winter, and the weather looks.
Well, here it's sunny and we're so happy.
Yes, this podcast connects me with people from all over the world. And then we are on different ends of the day. We are different ends of the season. I find that very fascinating that I tell people, oh, I'm going into winter or I'm going into summer when they are going in the other way up.
Yeah. Oh, well, just the energy too of the day, right? This is the end my end of my work day, and you're
Yes.
just right morning on a Saturday.
So thank you for taking the time and talking to us about your work, about your ideas. And I think that it fits very well with the core theme of our podcast. So for our listeners today, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Stacy Rocklein, and I am a relationship coach and a content creator on YouTube and a new author. I just published a book, and I am on a mission to eradicate loneliness, which I know sounds like a huge mission, but I think that we do that just each conversation at a time and each relationship at a time. And I help people one on one with my one on one clients to nurture their relationships, build new relationships, deepen their relationships. And I have a little membership as well. But I'm also a mom of three sons, two grown up ones, and one who's a teenager. And I've been married for 31 years. And I add those in because those are really important parts of who I am, I think, not just what I do professionally.
For anyone who has joined us for the first time, I talk to people in two different segments. One I call Between the Lines, where I speak to writers about their craft, their messaging. And the other segment I call this Fail With Me. The reason for that is often in our life, we can label something as failure, but not be objective about it and see where things lead us, open up about it, and create awareness about the shame, the stigma, and self care elements around it. And over time, it has grown and resonated with people. So I'm really thankful to all my guests and listeners that has taken me here. Coming to the core theme of the podcast and your work, Stacy, I would love to hear that relationship space. What do you think we label as failure? What are some of our biggest challenges that we do not look into objectively?
Failure to me is a really special word. It's a very personal experience. It's actually what led me into the work that I'm doing was being in a moment of personal failure or I I mean I was thinking about it as failure. I have always been a person who has run from failure in a sense that I'm using my quotation fingers, but fail at something and then just pivot, find a new way to solve the problem. And so it was a word that intellectually I knew meant, information and just pivot and try something else. And it's not a real failure. It's just pointing you in a new direction. But I think what I was not doing was really feeling failure and being okay with the feeling of it. I had been running from the feeling of it, and I think that that's where the really good work is I kind of stopped at this moment of failure in my life and decided to stop and feel it. And I realized at that point that part of the reason I ran from failure was because achievement was how I experienced love and how I experienced love as a kid and then how I chased love was by things I did for other people and things I accomplished. And so I wanted to stop and feel the feelings of falling short and learn to be okay with that. And I think that, when we look into our relationship space, you've got the failure one person feels on a personal level, just their stuff, like they're failing at their work or they're failing at something that's related to just them. But that just bleeds into the relationship because, well, obviously all of our failures personally bleed into our relationships, but it's such an opportunity for us to sit with the other person and to feel something in front of someone else. I think failure can be a pathway to intimacy if we're willing to share those things. Because, like you were saying earlier, it's really attached to shame so often for us. There's personal failures, there's failure within relationships, but I think anytime we leave each other lonely or we feel lonely, there's been a failure of some kind in that information sense where the other person needs to be seen and we haven't seen them. And I think that that's probably the root problem when it comes to any failures in relationships.
The acceptance becomes such a difficult part of our navigating our relationships, that we are going into a relationship, then what is it that we are carrying forward with us? And I often get queries from people who listen to the podcast that, oh, I had a relationship challenge, how do you suggest we navigate it? Now, there's no one solution that works for everybody, but I have seen that people go into a relationship without that clarity so much with us, that the awareness of what we are bringing to the relationship and what we are expecting in the relationship is not clear. And then we go into a phase of our life with certain biases, as opposed to if we were able to open our mind, then it would probably be a lot more easier and comfortable, and the bonding can become very natural, is what I sort of perceive. And I wanted to hear your thoughts around that. Like, what could be some of the biggest challenges that you have encountered as a coach, because you have been working in this space for a
Mhm.
long time? What are some of your own thoughts and approaches in that?
Well, I love what you were saying because we do come in with all of our own baggage. And it's like little kid me having a relationship with the other's a little kid, right? In some ways, we are kind of, if we don't work through some of our own issues and some of our own baggage, then we are showing up with these defense mechanisms that are really old, with our limiting beliefs about ourselves, about relationships. And so being able to come in and be aware of your own and the other person be aware of theirs is really critical. But that is like that's the ideal. That does not happen in the middle of conflict. In the middle of conflict, everybody turns into their little kid selves and communication becomes challenging. As far as different challenges people have in relationships, there's all kinds. I've dealt a lot with people who have dealt with betrayal and they're kind of trying to decide, do we stay in this relationship? Is there a future here? People who in busy midlife have found themselves lonely suddenly, right? Because when you're both working and you're raising kids and maybe taking care of parents and you're very busy, it's easier to ignore this loneliness that you may be experiencing. And as different things quiet down, you become really aware of it. And that is something, it's a distance between you that you have to kind of find your way back to each other. Some people are just challenged to find the right person. And that is about knowing what you want. And like that sounds very generic, but what I mean is how much emotional intimacy do you want? And then who is capable of meeting it? Because if you know that you want a really deep and meaningful relationship, but you keep picking people who are not able to show up that way, you're always going to be disappointed.
Very true. And you said something beautiful in your introduction that your objective is to address loneliness at its core. And I want to hear about the core idea that you're working on, that your work is built upon, let's say.
I think of loneliness as us not feeling seen. So you can have relationships all around you and still feel really lonely if you don't feel known by the other people, if you don't feel understood, if you don't feel seen and heard. And so in some ways, as that sounds like a big problem, but it does have at least a direction. It points us in a direction for then how do we become seen in our relationships? And then that is choosing the right ones to challenge people to show up for us, and then learning how to ask for those things in relationships and to get out of our own way so that we can receive love from people. I mean, some of us walk around with a guard around us that prevents the love that we think we want to come in. So it's a big problem for many people, but awareness, as you often talk about, is the first step in understanding that you're lonely, kind of admitting the truth of that to yourself, saying out loud, like, I am lonely. A lot of us don't want to face stuff like that. So that's a hard thing to do. And then figuring out what does that mean? Who do I build with? How do I build it? How do I create some relationships in my life where I do feel seen and connected? And so I'm always looking for connections and disconnections. How do we deal with disconnections so that we can get reconnected? And then how do we keep building a deeper, more meaningful connection with the right people? That's the in a nutshell.
What you said about being seen, and that is such a very important aspect, like whether someone is in a relationship and then they can feel lonely, and someone is not in a relationship, they can feel lonely, and someone who has kind of ended a relationship in a bad way and then they can feel lonely. And one of the core themes that I explore on the podcast is emotional intelligence. And we often do not admit those things to ourselves.
Mhm.
And when we are saying that we need to face our emotions, we need to come to terms with our emotions, accept where we are. But it can be very challenging as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then how do you suggest someone works through it?
I love this question because emotional intelligence is really important, critical. But I have a slight adjustment I want to make to it because, particularly because of the word intelligence, because I think that that is very thinking. It's so important that we know what different emotions feel like and we can name them and we can describe them to people. But real emotional like fluency, maybe. I don't have a word for it, but is being able to feel the feeling, not just identify it and not just talk about it. And I think that this gets to why some people feel like I've done the work and I still don't see things changing because, like, emotional intelligence, like intellectual work around emotions, is really important. But until we stop and we identify that feeling and we sit with that feeling and understand that it's survivable, understand what it is, how it feels, where it's in our body, and then see it move through us. We need that component too of emotional intelligence because I think that's how we really develop empathy is not just to kind of know on paper how emotions are, but actually like have the experience of it.
No, I don't see the questions I ask as a
Right.
wrong answer.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
ask a question because more of as a direction that
I kind of went in a direction, totally.
yes. And when I look at emotional intelligence 2 years ago, I probably would have said something else. To me, also, this idea of accepting our emotions, it kind of varies, it kind of grows with me
Hmm.
because sometimes I feel what you rightly said that we think that we have done this work, but still we are behaving in a way that we haven't. So what could be it? Like we think that we may have worked on building the emotional intelligence at surface, but deep down we are repeating the same patterns. And then when that realization comes, you go into another level and you understand, okay, there are unresolved areas to look at, but it's not the end.
Always.
So it's not like a fixed sort of definition. I think with me, at least, I know that
Yeah.
is kind of changes a lot. And I do journal quite a bit and I carry a journal in person so that there is something unresolved, then something that I don't understand. Like I'm feeling sad, but I don't know why I'm feeling sad. I try to
Hmm. Hmm.
write it down and be curious about it. And sometimes it takes a couple of days, sometimes even months to find an answer to why I was feeling what I am feeling, which is what you said, right? That we know that we have a feeling, we have identified the feeling, but have we allowed ourselves to feel that? And that works in different layers. And I'm always curious about it. I'm always learning about it. What I feel is that when we are struggling in a relationship, we either do not have time to do that work or we do not have capacity to do that work. And this is something I wanted to hear from you, as in, you know what needs to be done, but what if someone who's going through these challenges, they are not ready to change, they are not ready to accept, they're not ready to put in the work?
I mean, that's a really good question because I think a lot of people, especially your audience, who's on a transformation journey, they are listening to this kind of content and they're the journalers and they're out there growing and they're onboarding new exciting ideas and they're putting them into practice. And as they do that, the distance between them and a partner can become huge because their partner isn't alongside them for that journey of growth. And that can be very hard to find yourself somewhere and be looking far behind you, and that's where your partner is. At the and it happens to a lot of people. So if that's any way someone's feeling, like that's very normal. And at that point, you've got options. We can't force anyone into their work, as we know, but we can invite them to come alongside us, understanding that it's going to take I mean, if we think back on our own journeys, right? I think I started reading self-help in my mid 20s, like almost 25 years ago, right? That was a long time ago. I have done a lot of things since then, far more than like my partner, because it's not been an interest of his. So if I am going to expect somebody to come join me, that is a lot of steps between where they are and where I am. And if you see someone taking steps, even if they haven't caught up with you yet, that's a good faith that they're trying, which is, I think, really important. If the other person's just like, this is me, this is who I am, accept me or lose me, that's a decision to make for sure. But at the end of the day, as a partnership with anybody, a romantic, sibling, friend, anybody, pure acceptance of the other person is critical. That's all we want. We want someone to accept us exactly how we are. And that's the same thing the other person wants. And so being able to give pure acceptance exactly as they are is so important in our really close relationships. And we get to keep showing up in our growth, in our continued growth, in our continued transformation. And so we keep evolving ourselves. And if eventually that divide is too big, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But it's not a reason to stop doing your own work. And it's just, you're going to drive yourself crazy if you're like constantly trying to pull someone into the work that they don't want to do. So I guess the question is, can you live with this if you're in that moment, the other person won't do this? Is this a deal breaker? Or can you move forward, continuing to model this way that you have grown into? Like one of the really cool things that I've experienced is, I got to a point where I was like, oh, I want a deeper relationship this is decades into my marriage. I want a deeper relationship here. It took me a lot of personal work to be ready for that. I was more comfortable being kind of like emotionally shut down. And when you change the rules and you start asking someone to do something different, it's important that you approach that in the right way, which is to say, nothing that we've done behind us is necessarily bad, but I want to invite you into something new. And this is exactly what I think it looks like. And you are very encouraging. What is amazing is that you're modeling something, and then the other person eventually starts to share also because they were lonely too. And that was just one person starting the work. So one person can begin it, but at the end of the day, it's just you.
And I will explain a little bit more context to why I was asking that. Because sometimes I get questions from people, and again, this is not something that I'm doing for as a profession. I'm just doing this as a meaningful contribution back to society to spread that awareness. And I get questions from people, things like, oh, my partner is very angry. Can you have a chat? Or things like, oh, this is not working with my partner. What should I do? And the segue from both sort of instances is that we are, I see people who are stuck in a state of mind and they're not ready to put that work of acceptance. What you are also saying that you were at an advanced or mature level of understanding and clarity than your partner. And this can be true for so many people. And
Hmm.
people can be stuck without realizing they're stuck. If you think your cup is full, then you can only take so much. If you get that knowledge, that wisdom, you will not be a place to accept it. The reverse is also true. Some people think that they're always empty and they're trying to fill that cup with things from the external world. And they spend a long time before they realize what they're looking for is inside them. It's not something
Right.
that they're looking at. So whether people are in a relationship or not in a relationship, they if they are stuck, if they are in a difficult position, they often do not realize what work they need to put in. And this is something I wanted to hear from you. I guess I'm not framing that question very objectively is that what we are looking in a relationship, is that something we are looking at for at our partner, or is that something we are really looking inside? How do you feel about that? So I go into a
Mhm.
relationship. I am lonely. I want a relationship. But what I truly need from that relationship is that something I want in my partner? And I'm curious to hear your point of view if the question makes sense.
I mean, we all we all are children, and then we are harmed and often unintentionally, and then we are looking for someone to fill that hole of whatever it is. We're looking for either something familiar or something the opposite to try to make sense of the way that we were hurt, which never works. Like the work is always to create the wholeness within ourselves so that when you bring a partner in, it's an additive thing that you already are whole and then they are adding to your life because we will consistently be disappointed if we keep trying to fill a hole without doing our own healing. So you could be in a relationship you've been in for a really long time and realize, "Oh shoot, I picked that person because of a hole that I had." That's okay. Don't be hard on yourself about it. It's just still then going in and doing your healing work and creating a wholeness within yourself so that that person is this like beautiful addition to your life and you're not trying to fill each other's holes. Now, you do want some healthy, especially if it's a life partner, you want some healthy dependence on the other person. I want to be able to rely on them when I do have a need or I want to be seen or I want to, not feel lonely. That's a different thing than I'm not okay if I don't get that. Because when I feel like I am not okay if the other person doesn't see me, then there is this desperation in the relationship that is there's a push and pull to it. It has an unhealthy nature to it, and the other person can feel it. That's why often when we want, the other person will run. We find someone who's going to play that dance with us. And just like you were saying, like it just comes back to kind of doing our own work to make ourselves whole and just doing it layer by layer, right? Just when we think we're like, yeah, I got it. And then you're like, oh, wait, hold on, there's something else here. And we just keep kind of going around the corkscrew or hopefully continuing to elevate for our whole lives. But if you can find the wholeness in yourself so that the people that you're pulling in feel like beautiful additions, I think that that's the goal, the big goal.
And I ask that based on what I have faced and, kind of, let's say, listener questions back from
Yeah.
people that you're talking about all these nice things, but reality is something different. And you're very right, are making things harder than it is. There are so many challenges, and then often then we are not prioritizing that work that we need to put in, whether we are going into a relationship or whether we are in a relationship or we have just ended one. That work, that insight is very different.
An ending relationship is such an opportunity. It's so painful and there's so much grief, really. It's just even more than sadness. But once you can kind of get your nervous system settled enough, you just got handed like a whole thing of wisdom, right? There's all this information that you get out of this ending about what you want, what you don't want, who you want to be, who you don't want to be, what your patterns of behavior are, what you want to disrupt, what you want to keep. It's so worth taking the time to really process that with some grace for yourself and some gentleness because it's just such a point of potential growth. So, didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think endings are beautiful in their own way.
Absolutely. And it is quite possible that something has run out their life. That acceptance that if a relationship is coming to an end, it is coming to an end for a reason. And if we hold on to that, if we are not moving past that point, then there is a problem. Like it
Hmm.
can be a beautiful relationship and still it can come to an end. It can run its course.
Every relationship is coming to an end. It's either going to be by choice or by passing away. So they all end.
And considering that sort of dynamics, right? That today our life is changing. Mm, it's not the same even what it used to be like 2 months ago. Constantly getting challenged, constantly getting disturbed, and then we build all these coping mechanisms around us. Like we are always busy,
Mhm.
we are running after something, and in that autopilot mode, and we are not sitting down and reflect, connecting ourselves, grounding ourselves. Often there is very little time to do that. And in that process, the relationships get the strain, relationships get challenged, that the dynamics is changing, and then we haven't kept up to it, and the relationship faces the strain. And I wanted to hear from you, how do we do it better when we are dealing with that rush, with that demand
Yeah,
of our daily grind, and then
totally.
we are not understanding the dynamics and we are challenging that in terms of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I love what you were said because you're what you were saying because we are always changing. And I think it's a mistake for us to think that we found a person and that we're both like going to be cemented into the relationship exactly as it is right then and each person exactly as they are because that is not reasonable. They are constantly shifting and each person is constantly changing. I mean, I've been married for 31 years and my husband has met many different versions of me. And the only way a long relationship lasts is that you guys can keep accepting the new version of the person. And sometimes the next version is one where somebody is stuck in a season of depression or loss or a failure that they can't, they are struggling to navigate. We do keep changing though. So I think that we have to accept the fluidity of relationships and of ourselves. And I want to just make an argument for someone may think they don't have time to sit down and journal and kind of just process where they are and how things are going. But I also know that when two people have an argument that lasts 3 days, that takes so much energy and so many hours because you're still spending the time dealing with your differences either because you're so busy and you don't take time to be with yourself, be with the other person, and you end up with a problem that's going to take all your energy anyway, or you take a little bit of energy all the time to understand yourself and to ask questions about the other person. I think that a really important thing to do in a relationship is to just keep talking and not like about what's for dinner and who's picking up the kids and someone needs to walk the dog, but like talking about how the day was, how it felt, what are the challenges, what does the person need. If you keep talking to each other every day, even in the midst of all of that busyness, and you stop and you listen to the other person, small moments of connection that just take a couple of minutes, those things running underneath a really busy life will save you. They'll save the relationship. We all know how it feels to be running around in the morning and you're getting all your stuff together and you're getting people out of the house and you stop and you have a moment of a hug or kiss goodbye and you leave your separate ways. How different that feels than running around and doing everything and like just grabbing your coffee and you're out the door and you didn't even acknowledge the other person. Totally different energetic ways that we go about our day, and they're small things. It's important to do like small little pieces of appreciation. The Gottmans and their research, it's the 5-to-1 ratio. There need to be at least five positive interactions. It doesn't have to be praise or whatever, but just turning toward each other in some way to offset in a healthy relationship, to offset one, even slightly negative one. So we are busy, it is true, but the more connections we can make, it's like we're constantly feeding the connection, which is really important.
And I wanted to take that into something I have learned in my 17, 18 years of married life in a very hard way is emotional presence. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So when my daughter was younger, my wife had some mental health challenges and she didn't articulate it very well, that what exactly she's feeling and what exactly she's going through. Now that when I look back, that I see that she didn't understood it very well. So it took me a long time to understand her problem, even though she was not talking about it, she was not sharing it openly. And then I was struggling and I was drowning in that pressure when that happened because I was responsible for my family. And then we had a little child and I had my work challenges and I had no idea to navigate this, which is the moment I thought that I should start this podcast. I should write about this at some stage in my life, is to understand that when someone is going through a problem, they might not be able to articulate. And they're not always looking for a solution. They are looking for something to be present. And we talked about emotional presence when one partner is going through a challenge, is going through a hard time, could be anything, and they're not able to articulate it well. How do we support them? And how do we make sure that it's not a reflection on us? It's not like, oh, my partner is upset on me, but she might be going through something of her own. Other way around as well.
Mhm.
How do we work through such challenges?
I love this question because you said some really important things. One was that you felt responsible. And I do think that, you know, especially, male partners, they have this feeling of if everyone's not okay, I am not providing what I need to provide, whether that's like whatever, getting people around, finances, emotionally, like just our partners want to provide. And so that's a very hard feeling to feel like things aren't going well here. And how am I failing at it? And so I want to point that out because of two reasons. One, it's important to not take all of that load on yourself. It's too much for any one person to bear. And also, if you're the person who's struggling and you are able to articulate it, but if you are able to talk about it, I think that framing it in a way that doesn't make the person feel that they're failing you is really important. When you're asking someone to be emotionally present, it cannot be like, this is how you're failing me, because partners take that very, very hard. And it just automatically puts something in the way of what you actually need. So, how we approach people really matters. It is really tough when you see someone struggling and they don't know what's wrong and they don't know how to talk about it. I mean, I've had some depression, and in my experience, it's hard to even explain like what it is. I'm not like, I can't point to what is depressing me. All I know is I can't really function. And so when you don't know how to describe that to somebody and they're just watching you spiral down or not be able to get out of bed or not be able to do anything and they don't know what to do, like this is a hard situation for everybody. I do think emotional presence is critical. I love that phrase that you used. Most people don't need their problem solved. In fact, if people want their problem solved, they'll usually say, could you give me some advice? Or what do you think I should do? So, in any given situation, just like take that off the table unless you're directly asked. We hear problem and we want to solve it. And that's normal. But most of the time, people don't want that. They do want emotional presence. And if you've got someone who cannot articulate what they need, sometimes it is enough to just sit with them in quiet and not require them to answer questions they don't know the answers to, not require them to like make you feel better because you're in pain about it, but to just stay with them as they're having an experience and letting them know that you are here and you are steady. Obviously, you can't do that every minute of the day, but you can do enough of it that the other person feels like they're not in it entirely alone. There's so many people who don't know that's what the other person needs until they can figure out kind of where they're at. So that's an amazing story, and thank you for sharing it with us.
It was a very difficult phase of my life. I had no idea that I would be able to solve this. And now that I look back, it gave me the clarity to sort of understand and interpret any problem. And to be honest, I'm very proud of myself that I did.
I think that what you're talking about is really important because so many people struggle and in relationships, especially marriages, we struggle in silence because we keep things behind our closed doors when we're struggling or our partner's struggling, and that's like not something that we go out in the world and talk about, and so it's even more isolating
Mm.
to be trying to solve it on your own, and especially when it's your partner that is kind of struggling. And so I can't imagine. I mean, it sounds like a very difficult time. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how you were able to, like, what were the things that kind of carried you through or got you through to the end of that phase?
On its own, but
Yeah, true.
yeah, it would be a very interesting sort of reflection. People ask me even till now that how did you do it? How did that work? Because when I was in that phase, everyone told me that your marriage is not going to work. It's probably best to part ways. But something was telling me that what my wife was going through, she was not able to articulate this. So the real problem was something else. Real problem was not how she was behaving. And it took me years to be able to understand that and make sure she had that support system. But what I have understood in that difficult phase is that when someone is in a challenge, if we look at this as a spectrum, like someone is going through a difficult phase, it could be a mental health challenge, could be an emotional exhaust, could be anything. And then there are people, and then they're not able to articulate. That's the core sort of area I'm talking about. Then there are people who are carers who are supporting them. They don't know what the others are going through. Then there are people in the bigger family, in society, in people around them. They have no idea what the other person who are the carers are going through. So nobody knows what's going through. All right? And then when you don't know, it is easy for us to be judgmental. But instead of being judgmental, if you approach that with clarity and compassion, so the clarity is that there may be something is wrong, but you are not seeing it. You are blind to it. It's not happening before you, but something is happening. So recognizing that there is a problem somewhere else out there. And then the compassion element is very important because when I was going through that phase, I kind of burned out, my physical health deteriorated, and a lot of other things happened. So you cannot approach that situation with guilt, with greed. That you cannot
Yeah.
solve that with determination. You have to solve that with compassion. That you have to understand what the other person is going through. And at the same time, you have to be kind to yourself. See, because if you think that you can solve this the hard way, then you cannot. So that is how I remember it. And I feel thankful to the universe to get me across. It was a difficult phase of my life. And then what I remind me is that it's not over. It can happen again, but then I am ready for it. Then I know how to deal with
Hmm.
it. And which is idea behind Fail With Me. And I am writing about it in bits and pieces and articles and things in my journal. Maybe at some stage I will compile it and publish it as a book, but run this podcast and I connect with people. I feel that it is my authenticity, that energy that connects me with so many people. If I wasn't authentic, I don't think people would want to come onto my podcast or even listen to it.
Yeah. You said something really important too that I think is kind of like a bumper sticker for relationships is that if things get really hard, even if you feel like grit and pushing is the right thing, it's always softening. It's always compassion that is the right thing. So our knee-jerk reaction to maybe just like push through is not going to keep us connected. So that softening and that compassion is always the answer. It will always get you through something better, healthier, with more growth than just grinding your way through.
And I think it gave me the ability to read people a lot better.
Hmm.
Back then, yeah, I remember that I used to be very defensive, as in people something and I'll get upset. But now, when I walk into a room, I'm talking to people, I can read people so much better and I know how to communicate what is.
Hmm.
A lot of times it comes with the ability to listen. If you listen better, then probably you can be a better speaker. That's what led to the podcast.
Thank you for
I
sharing it.
told you that I don't script it and let it unfold as a part of the conversation. And now coming to your book, can you tell us a little bit about the book? And this is something I request all my guests. If they have written a book, can you read something from it?
The book is called Forgive Without an Apology: How to Heal, Set Boundaries, and Create Deeper Connections. And it is a self study version of a digital course that I used to run online. And it came from a period of time where I was always using like self-help and professional development to make myself the better version of myself, but it was always in a forward-looking way, like, oh, here's this thing that's broken about me. And I came to a point where I felt really lonely, and I realized that I was going to have to look back at my past in order to really heal. I couldn't just skip over the top of it and just keep trying to like fix myself up here. I had to dive back into the things that have happened to me and to process them. And so the book provides a formula, a step-by-step formula for going into past experiences so that you can make peace with them and so that you can really let go of what happened, let go of your defense mechanisms and your limiting beliefs about yourself that were born there in that experience or reinforced. And the reason it's called Forgive Without an Apology is because that's a place a lot of people get stuck waiting for an acknowledgement from the other person or waiting for some kind of closure. And that often isn't coming for us. So I want to give people a way to unstick themselves, even if they're not going to get the acknowledgement that they need. So I'm going to read a little piece right here, and it's a story. And I'm going to say that it's a small story that impacted me a lot, and I want anyone listening to kind of think about anything that you remember that is similar, where it wasn't one of those really big traumatic moments, but it could have been something that really changed you and changed your future and might be worth processing with a book like this. Okay. You have such a big butt. She smiled cruelly, as only a sixth grader can, a malicious glimmer in her eyes. I could tell she meant to embarrass me in front of the other girls at recess, but I was afraid to look at them to see if it was working. What if they had the same expressions of superiority and disgust? Unanimous agreement felt like too much to bear. I'd heard it before at home. My family teased me for it all the time, but this felt different. The way she said it made me feel like my big butt was a bad thing, a gross thing, something I should be ashamed of. I don't remember noticing my body much before that. I mean, I had preferences about my clothes and shoes, but I never considered the body I was hanging them on. It wasn't that I thought I was perfect or anything, I literally didn't think about it. It's hard to describe the enormity of that comment, how it terrorized me for years, how I weaponized it against myself and became my own abuser. and how I'm still tenderly repairing the body image that was shattered before it was ever fully formed. I bet you understand, reader. Someone in your young life might have said a careless thing about your body, intelligence, or character that you still carry around. It happens to all of us. Let's further unpack this particular incident that happened to me as an 11-year-old. When understanding washed over me, I had a seismic shift in my self awareness. It couldn't be a coincidence that this girl was teasing me about the exact same thing my family teased me about. It could only mean one thing. I not only had a big butt, but the bigness was wrong, and my family had known all along. I felt like such a fool for never realizing how ugly I was. I felt betrayed, and it seemed so cruel. From that moment forward, it became my Achilles heel. When one of my siblings wanted to cut me, they knew exactly which weapon to use. I lost a layer of emotional safety with my family that day. I was already a hypervigilant child, constantly trying to gauge the approval or disapproval of those around me, but I'd missed a big one this time. If I could have been so blind about this enormous, hideous, disgusting feature of mine, I probably couldn't trust anything I thought about myself.
Very apt to the discussion where we are talking about self-awareness and discovery.
Hmm.
And I would like to take this moment to request our viewers and our listeners that we will put the book link in the episode description. If you liked this discussion, how we approach the subject and what we talked about, please go take a look at the book. And now you've got a chance to listen to this from the writer directly. So I believe that that gives you certain advantage to know more about the book, what is being covered in the book. Now,
Thank you.
we started talking about loneliness, and then we talked about the emotions that come with it, the awareness that comes with it, and the acceptance of it. Now, in a successful relationship, there is, of course, the authenticity of the connections, and then there can also be how we exercise boundary management. Now, we are wired for connections. We want connections. We are social beings, and we want them. But at the same time, we struggle with our vulnerability so much that sometimes we can be guarded, sometimes we can, exercise our boundaries. How do we walk this challenging path? We, on one side, we want connections, and on other side, we are struggling with our vulnerability.
Hmm.
We do How do we balance that so that we can make better connections? And I think that would be a good way to kind of summarize all that we talked about, and would be kind of a finishing note for our conversation today.
Vulnerability is a really important component of many things, but intimacy, emotional intimacy for sure. And I just a quick word on boundaries. I think about boundaries as a circle of safety. Okay, so they're creating a circle of safety where inside are all the behaviors and the actions that support each person and support the relationship. And then outside the boundaries are things that are unacceptable. And that changes from relationship to relationship. I know people who can raise their voices to each other and they're fine with it. And then inside my relationship, that's like a boundary that we hold. We don't, raising voices doesn't work for us. So it just depends on people's tolerances, but it's what's protecting the relationship, because when the relationship and when the people are protected, then we can be vulnerable. And by its nature, there's always a small risk with vulnerability, but you want to mitigate as much of the risk as possible. You want to take out as much risk as you can so that you can be vulnerable. Because to create an intimacy, you kind of do this dance where I'm going to be vulnerable and the other person is going to hold me, stay, listen, have emotional presence, make me feel seen. And then it has to be both ways in order to have real intimacy. The other person's going to be a little vulnerable, and I'm going to be able to stay and listen and see them so they don't feel lonely. And when we do that back and forth over time, we create this deep connection. and we build trust. And the more times you do it, the more trust you have, which means more vulnerability and more intimacy. So you can't do any of that without boundaries. If you've ever gone into a relationship boundaryless, it's very easy to get hurt. Your vulnerability is dangerous. So we have to have some in there, and they protect everybody. They protect you, they protect the other person, they protect the relationship. And they are critical because you're absolutely right. That vulnerability is kind of the secret sauce for relationships.
Thank you so much for such an insightful and deep conversation. And I would also like to thank our listeners, our viewers on YouTube today for staying with us on this wonderful episode. Please check out the book from the episode description if you like our conversation, and to support Stories and Stanza, whether you are watching on YouTube or you are listening on an audio podcast platform, so that we can bring more meaningful discussions like this. Thank you once again, Stacy, for your time and such beautiful thoughts. And I wish the book all the success.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved this conversation.